What's up, guys? I'm Nicole Rios, and I've got opinions. Today, we are going to talk about fiscal responsibility. I know it's not a super enthralling topic, but it's got to be done because who's paying for all this? Um, the United States government currently spends roughly $2 trillion more per year than it takes in. And that's not a rounding error, that's a policy choice. And somebody has to pay for it. Spoiler alert, it's you, it's your kids, and it's their kids. Welcome to the show. Today, we're going to talk about the deficit, our current debt, the amount of debt that needs to be refinanced coming up, our interest rates, and how that all impacts affordability, where we're at now, where the midterms might take us, and where 2028 might take us. It has been prior to the little war chaos of the last couple of weeks, affordability was one of the most spoken words you heard out from any politician. However, I don't see any policy. I don't see anything being put up to make a difference here. This was a really frustrating situation for me because back, if you remember, around the beginning of the year, all of the Democrats were screaming about the additional Obamacare subsidies that got put in as emergency backups for COVID. And they were all screaming that we were somehow going to have millions of people without health care. Um, and really, it just saved us a ton of money. So that is a very interesting thing for me because neither party has put up another healthcare bill or tried to solve any of that problem. It was basically just the Democrats' opportunity to scream about something. The other thing that got me was how up in arms they were about people having to do work requirements, 20 hours a week. That could be work, school, volunteering, even for able bodied people in order to get SNAP benefits, which again, we're going to talk about that today. Because the way out of our fiscal hole is not more entitlements, it's not more government programs, it's less. And I guess that always does go back to the general conservative theory here of small government. But when it comes down to it, an individual cannot spend outside of their means forever. And it's really funny that the government doesn't seem to be functioning that way. Uh, so, some things that I am going to talk about today are the national debt. Right now, our accumulated federal debt is around $38 trillion. It's going up exponentially because the interest on this debt is just continuing to climb. And our annual deficit is the difference between what we take in and what is spent. Um, we have surpassed the amount that I think we ever imagined to. I remember when Obama was president, we were talking about our credit rating, and that was some crazy thing. And we're in a much worse position now than we were then. And all of a sudden, things have gone quiet. We Before COVID, our national debt was around 23 trillion, and now we're like 14 trillion more than that. And that was only 5 years ago. So I guess that's why I'm trying to like ring the alarm bells here because we all need to take this perspective because it's not going to get better. Um, the Congressional Budget Office in October of 2024 um, said that our federal deficit for the fiscal year 2024 came in at 1.83 trillion, which was the third largest deficit in United States history, outside of times like specific in COVID. Um, that's a lot, and it is something that should keep every American up at night. We're currently now spending over 1.1 trillion per year just on interest payments, which is almost as much as our defense budget, which everybody screams about is so high. It's like, you guys were paying more in interest. And 8 trillion is going to be needed to be refinanced in 2026. That is a huge issue because when we look at our interest rates, they're much higher now than they were when that money was when those bonds were sold. And it's going to cost us a lot more to service it at a 4.8 or 4.5 interest rate than it did at 0 0.5, 0.75. Okay. That's going to be a huge problem. Because not only are we going to have to pay the higher interest rate, we're going to have to sell it back at less than what we really need. And we're going to have to end up financing more. So we're now spending more on interest payments than on national defense, which means we're better at paying Visa than protecting our country. So I hope we're all proud of that. Congratulations. Congratulations, Washington. Um, like I said, from a conservative point of view, this is a fundamental failure of governance. Um, Milton Friedman actually said there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. And don't we know that, like, this deficit is not something that's going to pass? It's not going to go away. It's a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Every man, woman, and child in America currently owes approximately $107,000 as their share of the national debt. And a family of four owes over $428,000. And we never signed up for that. Um, this to me again comes down to policy. It comes down to the politicians. We have politicians out here that are proponents of something called the modern monetary theory. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but it's MMT. And it argues that a country that controls its own currency can never truly run out of money. It just needs to print more. Stephanie Kelton wrote a book about it called The Deficit Myth, which AOC has cited. Bernie loves it. And I just want to look at this like for a moment, okay? Because this is what leading Democrat politicians are citing and talking about as economic policy. The argument here is that a sovereign nation that prints its own currency can always pay its own debts. The deficit is just fear mongering. It's a political tool. It prevents social programs from being implemented or cutting them. And that the real constraint isn't money, it's inflation, and we can manage that. Okay. Here's the problem. The inflation is the tax. Okay. The answer to unlimited spending as print more money is inflation. That's how that works. You print more money, that money has less value. Ask Zimbabwe. Okay. Um, and so when we had, 9.1% inflation in June of 2022, as a reminder, y'all, it was that high. Okay. So now it's down 3 point. It's amazing. The value of the dollar has increased. And we get further with the money that we have. So even though things might feel like they're not that much better, our dollar is going way further than it was. There obviously is still some work to do, but again, 9.1. Um, and that's what happens when you flood the economy with extra dollars printed. Like this is what happened through COVID. We had to put more money into the economy in order to keep everything going, but at the end of the day, it just decreased the value of every dollar that was in the economy. Um, and the second point of this is that we don't own all our own debt. We have $8 trillion of US debt that are owned by other countries, Japan actually being one of them. So when you see the new Japanese minister coming in and meeting with Trump, listen, he is securing our debt. He is making sure that the relationship that we have with our the country that holds the highest amount of our debt is a secure relationship. And that is very important. Um, they expect that the value of the bond they buy is going to hold and retain its value. If we print money, the value of that bond is going to drop unless people are going to be inclined to buy our debt from us, okay? We need to think about the fact that all these other countries are holding our IOUs. And I think about it like this. If you let your neighbor borrow $100, And then all of a sudden you see them show up in their driveway with a new car. Are you going to ever lend them any money again? No, because they're not paying you back. They devalued your money by going and spending it on something else that didn't help you, didn't really help them. Um, and it doesn't create a reliable trade partner. Okay. That is a major issue. And they're not going to accept that we just need to print more money to pay for social programs. And the interest rates go up. And again, we have to put more out to try and get people to buy that up. And if there's nobody to buy it, like we even just saw the last bond market that went up, it was slow. There were not people competing for our debt, and that's a problem. Like I said, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, they all practice this whole idea of print to spend model. And it was hyperinflation. It wiped out the savings of ordinary working people. You have to pay, for example, in Zimbabwe, it was like $1 million for a bag of rice. Like, come on, what the value of money just completely drops through the floor. Um, and the deficits truly don't matter at that point because we have this annual interest payment, and that's irrelevant when you think about it like that because we have to focus on getting ahead of the interest. For anybody who has uh, ever been in credit card debt or any level of serious personal debt, and you feel drowned out by that interest payment, just think about the fact that when you can't even keep up with your interest payment, you're not even working on the principal. You're not getting anywhere except drowned. And printing money doesn't improve that situation. You do nothing for getting out of the debt problem you're already in. Um, the other thing that I see said all the time is the tax the rich comment. Okay. Listen, this isn't a revenue problem. More taxes to the government that isn't currently effectively using the tax money they have doesn't solve the problem. Uh, it's a classic response. Oh, if corporations and billionaires just paid their fair share, the deficit would vanish. Bernie Sanders built his career on this, right? But now we also see Ro Khanna, we see all Mamdani, all these people, all these Democrats trying to come out and say, "Oh no, it's the rich people that just need to pay a little more." Here's the reality of the situation. The combined net worth of every US billionaire is around 5.5 trillion. Okay, as of 2024. That's the information I got. The national debt is 36 trillion. Even if we took every dollar from every billionaire and left them with zero, it covers about 15% of the national debt one time. And then all those billionaires are gone, the debt's still there, and all the jobs and companies that they provided don't exist anymore. Does that solve any problem? No, it doesn't. It's a bumper sticker. It's not a fiscal policy. Tax the rich doesn't get you anywhere. It gets people leaving. Like you've seen the exodus out of New York, you've seen the exodus out of California. Rich people can leave. So you can't threaten that you're going to take their money when they provide jobs and when they have the means to get away from you. And again, even if you were to take all of their money, it does very little to help our situation. Okay. Uh, even even the idea that somehow tax cuts are going to increase the deficit, it's actually hasn't been proven to be true. Our tax revenues increased after the 2017 tax cuts, rising from 3.3 trillion to 3.86 trillion. And the deficit grew because spending grew faster than that revenue. So again, this is a spending problem. uh, Additionally, once you go above a certain tax rate, revenues decline and it slows economic activity. People offshore investments and growth stalls, which is, I think, what we've probably seen over the last decade. When you try to increase taxes or make things, add regulations, make things harder for business people, that's the beauty of capitalism. We all figure out how to pivot, how to move. As a business owner, guess what? You learn how to make your money. A good business owner doesn't sit there and let their business fail. They figure out how to do it properly, and they find the best way to make the most. Um, and so that is something that we all need to realize. Taxing the rich isn't going to do it. And printing more money is just going to decrease the value of the dollar and add to inflation. And unfortunately, all we have from Democrats are those two options, and it's ridiculous. Um, so, you know, we currently finance the gap that we have between our income and our spending by issuing these treasury bonds, um, which are these like IOUs that we sell to foreign governments and investors in the Federal Reserve. And it's a loan, right? So they are lending that money to us based on whatever interest rate is currently happening. Now, the problem is that if they bought that bond for $1,000 and it pays $50 per year, and then on a 5% interest, then if our interest rates rise to 6%, now that bond could make $60 per year in that coupon. And so nobody wants to buy the $50 bond anymore because they can make more. So then we have to go sell that $1,000 bond for $900 to get people to buy it at that 50 year or $50 coupon. And nobody wants, and everybody, and then we have a gap of $100 that we're going to have to refinance out at the 6%, right? So, like I was saying, we're at the point now where we're coming up on having to do this for $8 trillion dollars. Okay. That is a massive problem. That money was financed at zero point 0.5, 0.75, 1.5, and currently we're looking at 4.5. Okay. So just refinancing the debt is going to increase our massive issue. So the which is why again I think that Trump is meeting with Japan, Trump is meeting with all these, not going hard on China. The reality is that Japan holds just about $1 trillion of our debt. China holds $860 billion of our debt, which is down significantly from the peak, but is still a lot of money. And then other domestic holders hold a lot of the rest of it, which again comes back on us, is on our shoulders, okay? And the less confident they are in our ability to pay it back or in our fiscal management, the higher the interest rate is going to be in order to compensate for the risk. And we see a lot of this happening in the UK. They had a real problem with their debt. Their debt to GDP ratio is like 120% right now, which is not great, guys. It's not great. Ours isn't that bad yet, but again, this is supposed to be one of our allies, and economically, they're not doing well either. And I think that on some level, some of this is the saving grace, is that there's no country right now that economically is doing fantastic, but we cannot keep spending into oblivion and thinking things are going to change by just owning each other's debt. It's not it's not going to work out for anybody because it's going to make the money be a farce. Money's going to be, what's the point? If none of it is real and everybody's just printing it, and nobody is ever going to get ahead of their debt and the interest on their debt, the option then is default. And then what? We're screwed as the little guy. And so that would be my big like red flag, okay? So for example, or for reference, our 10-year treasury is one of the most popular because it's the sweet spot between it's long enough to reflect like confidence in the economy, but not too long to be stuck at that certain interest rate. And it generally captures the confidence in the market better than any other maturity length. Um, and this is important in the interest rate world because the interest rates for mortgage rates and corporate borrowing and car loans and credit card rates are all kind of based off the 10-year. And so, for reference, in 2020, the 10-year was at 0.5%, then 2021, 1.5%. 2022 hits, and now Fed had to hike the rates back up because we had 9.1% inflation. So it got bumped from 1.5 up to 4.0. 2023, we saw between 4.0 and 5.0, which was the highest since 2007, okay, before the financial crisis. And then between 2024 and 2025, it averaged between 4.2 and 4.8, which again is much, again, elevated beyond where we needed to be. And so we went from borrowing at 0.5 to borrowing at 4.5 to 5%. And it sounds like it's a small number, but it's not. When you do the math on $36 trillion of debt, the difference in the interest rate is measured by hundreds of billions of dollars per year. Okay. And the federal government is now paying more on that interest than it spends on Medicaid. Okay, so we're talking entitlement programs, but again, we're blowing out all these opportunities that we could for our social, our welfare, our social safety net, everything else on paying down this interest. Okay, which we're not getting ahead of. We're not getting ahead of it. Um, so it is more than we spend on all of our discretionary non-defense programs combined. And this is what happens when you spend for decades acting like borrowing is free. And this is some of the overconfidence I think that we end up in as America, as the reserve currency, that we have this free range to behave this way in a fiscal manner. And again, somebody's going to come knocking for that paycheck. Uh, and so, you know, the Federal Reserve's interest rate policy after the financial crisis 08 through COVID kind of enabled this spending spree, making borrowing free. The low interest rate was super alluring. I mean, how many of us have gotten pulled into buying a new car because it was 0% APR, or opened a new credit card because for the first year it was 0% APR and then ended up getting stuck in a hole because beyond that the initial term, it's 26% or whatever the interest rate is that gets you. It is alluring, it sneaks you in, but at the end of the day, it comes back to bite you. And that is the problem with credit in general. Okay. I'm not going to go off on a whole Dave Ramsey spiel on you, but it creates a spending addiction, and it creates a lack of responsibility for being able to come up with it and being lured into having things. Okay. The future here is a little grim, okay, because the CBO projects that the federal debt will reach 166% of our GDP by 2054. Anything higher than like 90% of debt to GDP is like historically been associated with slow economic growth, recession, real economic problems. Okay. And right now, I'm pretty sure we're on the cusp of about 100. Okay. Like I said, there are some countries in Europe that are closer to 120, but still, debt to GDP, let's have GDP be like way more than our debt. Okay. I would love to see 50%, 35% even. Like, let's be able to cover. We need more assets than debt here, y'all. Um, the way that I see it, there's no good way forward here. Like I see four paths forward, all of them suck. We can inflate the debt away by printing the money, devalue our currency, get back inflation, back to a high level is kind of already happening. We could have massive increases, which would crush our economic growth. It would make people leave, like I said. This is really what the Democrats think the answer is here is to tax the piss out of all the billionaires and then we could just say goodbye. They would leave. And then, serious spending cuts, which I think needs to happen regardless. Okay. It's brutal politically. Nobody wants to be the party that steps up and does this. But at the end of the day, this is where the math needs to math, y'all. This is where we have to get serious because if it were you or I, and we are responsible human beings and adults, if we knew that we were spending 90% or more of our income on debt, we would realize we had a problem. Okay, we would have to make some major changes in our life to get ourselves situated, or we would have to go into bankruptcy, which again creates major changes in your life to try and get yourself situated. Um, it is what I think the conservatives really need to talk about. If we're talking about the economy crushing the younger generations, the idea for me is that like everybody on some level has enjoyed some aspect of all of this spending. And now it's time for us to as a community endure a little bit to provide a future for our children. Um, like I said, we could default. It honestly is unthinkable for the sake of our economy and our protection and our hegemony in the world. But it's no longer an impossibility. Um, so, you know, we have, like I said, the government, we have four options. We cut the spending, we raise the taxes, we inflate the currency, or we default. Three of those are catastrophic, and one of them is just hard. Washington has been too cowardly to do the difficult one for the last 50 years. So we've been slowly doing the catastrophic ones instead and calling it compassion. And at the end of the day, when you teach this huge amount of people to live off of entitlements or live off of the social safety net when there is no more money to print and they don't have any skills or any ability to provide for themselves, that's not going to be compassionate. We're going to have a real problem. Um, so the Manhattan Institute has shown conclusively that discretionary spending cuts alone cannot close the fiscal gap. And the only way that we can become more solvent is through the entitlement reform, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Everything else is nonsense. This is why Doge didn't make a impact. I'm hoping that all of this fraud investigation does something about it because that is really sucking a lot out through a lot of these programs. And you know, pick your poison, or it's going to be chosen for you. Uh, prior to this war, like I was saying, we heard all of these politicians out here talking about affordability. And I think that we have very few levers to manipulate when it comes to trying to make things more affordable when we have all this debt. The first one, I think the first main one that I always hear people talking about is the housing. Housing's too expensive. Although I saw this morning a chart that showed the housing costs coming down by a lot, rent housing costs coming down by a lot, which I think is good on the consumer level. The problem is that because of the lack of housing, with all the influx of all the illegal immigrants over the last 5 years, builders and developers have put a lot of money into building new units. And they built those units for a price based on the fact they thought they were going to get a certain amount back for them in rent. And now, because the rent prices are dropping, it's creating this massive loss for builders. Even in Nashville, there have been a couple of projects that were announced that have been canceled because there A isn't the jobs, but B they're not getting back what they intended. Um, the other lever they've been trying to pull with housing is to have like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac uh, kind of back some of these mortgages with new leniencies on credit checks and um, you know, all I see here is 2008 all over again. Um, they are trying to, purchase these mortgages from lenders, bundle them, sell them as mortgage-backed securities. But the reality is that they approximately guarantee 70% of all US mortgages. And if they're reducing the requirements to get a mortgage, it's it's putting us at the same risk that we were before. And this was not that long ago. Like, we didn't learn this lesson that this wasn't a good idea to sell mortgages to people who couldn't afford them or didn't have the means to pay for them. Um, it is very scary. And I understand that it's trying to open doors for people who don't have access to buy a house right now. But if rent prices are dropping and you can't provide a good credit score or a pay stub or a down payment or anything that's going to actually prove that you can own this home and show up and pay this bill on time, why should the taxpayer bail you out again? Why should that be backed by the government? I'm not on board with that one, y'all. I'm sorry. Again, I have a lot of compassion for people who feel like they want to own a home, but guess what? I've owned a couple homes, and it's not just about paying the mortgage. It's the taxes. It's fixing something when something breaks. It's being able to replace the roof when the roof needs to be replaced. It's being able to maintain the upkeep in the house. You think that the life is sweet to own your own home. It's a job. It is a second job to own a home. And if you can barely get enough money to pay for that mortgage, you're not going to be able to maintain the home. And the value of the home is just going to go down anyway. And at the end of the day, if you default on that and then the value is through the floor because you didn't upkeep the house or it needs, $100,000 of work to put into it to keep up. Again, if that's owned by Freddie or Fannie, it's owned by the taxpayer, and the taxpayer is going to have to pay that out. And I'm not interested. Home ownership is not something that should be handed out like candy, and it requires real responsibility and durability in order to maintain. Um, I think that some of the things that are the problem here are that the home price versus income has changed a lot. Median home prices in America have risen over 40% since 2020, and wages have not kept up. That has been partly driven by the low rate, the Fed's low interest rate, which made it easy to borrow in order to buy homes. But that doesn't have an impact on what people are making and how jobs are doing. So there's creates a separation there. Um, and then, like I said, we have these, affordable housing pushes to reduce the ability or the um, barriers to like borrow, which beyond just lower interest rates. Like I said, they're lessening the credit reports. They're only requiring a good credit report from one reporting bureau and not the combination of the three. And lower percentages on the down payments. And the problem here also is that depending on what length term or whether you get a fixed rate mortgage or not, we are looking at these 10-year treasuries going up in interest rate. And so when these mortgages refinance, it's going to be more costly. Again, like I'm saying, like buying a house is for most of you, I'm sure you know this, and I'm preaching to the choir, but buying a house is not a one-time thing. Just because you can get the mortgage doesn't mean you can maintain the mortgage or maintain the home or maintain the mortgage when it refinances. Um, and I don't think the government should be putting its foot into that mess. It's again, for me, it comes down to a little bit of personal responsibility. And if rent prices are dropping, you know what? It's not the worst thing to go for a cheaper rent for now and save up a little bit more money and figure out what happens with the housing market as supply increases. Okay. Um, the other thing that I want to point out is that the numbers on personal and consumer debt right now are ugly, okay? We have $17.9 trillion of total US consumer debt. We like to spend, clearly. We're Americans. It's all about consumerism and having the new thing and everything else. But that's a lot of money, guys. Credit card debt is $1.17 trillion as far as that was from Q3 of 2024. So it could be way more now. Probably is way more now. Auto loan debt, 1.63 trillion. Student loan debt, 1.77 trillion. Mortgage debt, 12.6 trillion. Okay. It's a lot of money that is backed but not real. Okay. Um, credit card delinquency rates 90 days past due or higher or at their highest level since 2011. The average credit card interest rate is between 21 and 22%, which is a 40-year high. And now Americans owe over $1 trillion in credit card debt at 21% interest. And that to me signifies people are broke. People are willing to pay on the credit card for you know 5 times the regular interest rate here. Um, and I just think about like imagine the government charging 21% on the interest rate. But Visa gets to do that like it's just another day. Though, again, this was something that was brought up of capping the interest rates on credit cards, and that didn't fly either. It's like no solution is going to be comfortable. Okay. There's always going to be some lobby that's pushing for this or that. And the reality is that we're all going to sink. We're all going to sink. It's going to be the businessmen. It's going to be the people on Main Street. Okay. Nobody's going to get out of this unscathed. So we really need to be serious and kind of all band together on this one. Because, the left is blaming the corporations and the banks, and our view, the conservative view, says, okay, yes, there's market forces and personal responsibility, but the reality is that there's been decades of government engineered, artificially low interest rates and the stimulus checks and all these things that created priority in consumption. And now we're seeing what comes of that. It's taking its toll. Um, and easy money redistributes wealth from the savers to the spenders. And we are taking money from our children's future in order to have that new car, in order to have that bigger house. And honestly, I think it's a shame. I think it's disgusting. The other thing is, like I said about the healthcare, nobody has any answers, but the Democrats want to scream that we're cutting healthcare and, putting people at risk. And the reality is, it's like, you guys, we don't have the money to pay for it. The more we spend on it, the faster we end up in the hole and nobody gets help. We have the three largest drivers of federal spending are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Okay, they're all on autopilot. Nothing's happening about modifying them, updating them. Social Security's at 21% of the federal budget. Medicare's at 15%. Medicaid's at 9%. Then we're finding out about all this fraud, billions of dollars of fraud out of these programs. So just pissing that money away. Um, and these programs are growing faster than our GDP, tax revenue, or inflation. Okay. So again, we're outspending our growth. It's not getting better. The Social Security is projected to be depleted by 2033 to 2035. And at that point, benefits are going to be cut by about 23% unless Congress does something about it. And it really sucks because at the end of the day, whoever's in the administration, if nothing is done about this policy-wise, whoever's in the administration at that time is going to have a massive problem on their hands. Okay. And when we think about this is potentially 7 to 9 years out. And when we think about the amount of boomers that are going to be trying to retire or going into end of life care during that period of time, our spending is already projected to go through the roof anyway. Okay. And then it's going to be cut by 23%. So we need some real solutions. And people sitting on their hands and not doing anything about it and passing the buck to the next guy, it's going to create a huge problem for whoever is in the presidency at this time. Okay. It's going bankrupt. Social Security is not going to be there for me. Okay. It might not even be there for my parents. And we just keep taking the money out and pushing the buck down the line. Well, listen, that the end of that line, like I said, is less than a decade away. And people are screaming about these emergency Obamacare cuts now. What happens when there's no more Social Security, y'all? Or it's cut like by 20%. Not to mention, I read this article yesterday that said that there are some wealthy adults who are collecting Social Security over six figures and they haven't made themselves anyway. So I don't know, but maybe we need to start talking about who should actually be receiving Social Security. And I know it's touchy. I've talked to a bunch of boomers that are like, hey, I paid into it my whole life. Don't take my Social Security. I hear you, but maybe we should like put it into a fund or something because it needs to be making some interest. It needs to be making its own money because it's not being paid out in the way that it was paid into. You can't pay into it $300,000 over your lifetime and then take out $700,000. That math doesn't math. So there needs to be something done about the caps on what people can receive based on what they paid in, or we need to figure out a way for it to make itself some money or it to be not touched unless it's going to the specific person. We all need our own Social Security account, okay? Independent. Now, I put the money in and I take it out, and we shouldn't be required to do this social safety net thing because clearly it's not paying for what people paid into it. Its current iteration is not what the original intent was for it. The fact that we had the American Rescue Plan in 2021, like I'm saying, that expanded the ACA subsidies, was only supposed to be a temporary 2-year COVID measure that were extended through the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which I understand inflation was at 9% during that time, and people were really struggling with income, jobs, everything. Okay, so I get wanting to extend these healthcare subsidies. But the problem with entitlement programs is they're very hard to take away once they're given. Okay. And it distorted the insurance market by masking the true cost of premiums. And so everybody thought life was sweet, borrowing at all these super low rates and not having them pay the true cost of things like insurance, which is a huge expenditure, people. Healthcare is not cheap. Okay. Especially our healthcare, our technologies and our resources. We have some of the best in the world that doesn't come for free. And I really feel like most people have just become very expectant about what they want from their government or what they want from America without truly understanding the cost. Okay. We've gotten so comfortable with all of our technologies, and everybody has a new iPhone, and everybody drives a new car, and everybody wants an extra 1,000 square feet in the home. Listen, we're going to end up paying for it. We're not going to be that comfortable for a long time. And I know, the whole AI conversation, replacing jobs and everything, that's a whole nother conversation, I realize. And it will have an impact on the economy. I don't necessarily see it having a strong impact on the economy as soon as others believe, but I wouldn't be surprised if at that same time that Social Security is running out, that we're going to see the worst of it. That is a fiscal disaster. Okay. Cutting people's entitlements by 20% and then having high levels of unemployment, a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. And we need to get ahead of it. Um, I think that there are ways in which AI will reduce the cost of things. I think specifically in healthcare, it has a lot of applicable pieces to it that will reduce the cost of specialties and open up more time for doctors to be seeing more patients. Um, and I'm hopeful that drug costs and things like that will start to come down because research will cost less and we'll be able to really make some headway. But most companies won't lower the price for the sake of it. They're just going to take the extra revenue that they make off the top by implementing AI. And it just is going to take a lot of responsibility. And I hope that we can realize that. And then this fraud, okay? There was approximately that we know of, okay, improper payments, the wrong amount, ineligible recipient, insufficient documentation. And this was in 2023, okay? Totaled approximately $236 billion. Okay. All of the emergency fraud from COVID, there have been multiple convictions of people who fraudulently took emergency funds. I saw this guy yesterday. One man took $4.4 million and just like PPP loans and just used it for him and his buddies. It wasn't actually for any employees, like again, making fake um, healthcare centers, daycare centers, claiming employees they didn't have, taking money they didn't need. We uh, the Department of Labor's Inspector General estimated that at least $191 billion of the 872 billion in unemployment benefits paid during COVID were fraudulent. So that's great. Um, People working two jobs, people being unemployed by one and then working some remote job. And there was also the SBA Inspector General estimated that there was $64 billion or more in PPP loans that were fraudulent. Um, that went to even prisoners, dead people, fake businesses, like I said. So we just handed out hundreds of billions of dollars during COVID with no due diligence. And dead people got stimulus checks and prisoners got PPP loans for their. Oh my God. It makes me sick, y'all. I'm serious. Everybody got in on it, but the responsible ones. I had a business that went under and during COVID, and that's because I played by the rules and didn't take advantage of the system, while all these other people got paid out millions of dollars for nothing. And I can tell you, as a tax-paying, law-abiding citizen, that was operating a small business and trying to make it work and pivoting every time the state told me we had to be shut down or we couldn't have people in the building or whatever else it was. It is offensive. It is absolutely offensive that people took advantage of the system to that level. This one guy, $4.4 million for one person. And we didn't double check this. We didn't go through. We just let it rain. It is it is just something else, to be honest with you. Um, so now we're seeing, like I said, now we're seeing way more fraud than we ever thought. I mean, in Medicare, we can probably imagine there's like probably $500 billion of fraud a year. Once they go through everything and find everything out, like I saw Doge is going to go through and run all the AI on it, and we're getting the interfaces to have some of these systems connected so that when somebody dies, Social Security is notified, or it doesn't take a person relaying this information to find out about things like that. Medicaid is $36 billion a year. Plus, we have all of the illegal aliens that are being getting free healthcare, and that's being reimbursed by Medicaid and the government. And that again is it's costing us. It costs us a lot of money, okay, that we don't have. I think that this is one way in which AI is really going to help us. It helps to just flag stuff like duplicate social security numbers and suspicious billing codes over and over again, a bunch of places at the same address, billing for different types of services. Um, and it is my hope that this comes out on a positive endpoint because it needs to. It really needs to. And we have to step up and have a little bit more fiscal personal responsibility. Okay. We need to start saving independently. We need to start investing. Okay. Our own selves. These Trump accounts are our way out of this insolvent Social Security. Okay. Um, and the reality is that Social Security was designed in 1935 when the average lifespan was 61 years and the retirement age was set at 65. Okay, Social Security was not meant for people to live on for 15 years. It was meant to help the people who lived 4 years longer than the expected lifespan. Okay, so in today's world, this would mean average lifespan in today's world is 75 years old, the average between men and women, okay, in America. This means that Social Security, based on that, Social Security shouldn't kick in until we're 79 or 80. Okay? So we are responsible for providing for ourselves until we're at that point. Maybe not in your opinion, maybe clearly not to the government, but if you do the math on this, that's how it's supposed to work. Okay? It was designed as a safety net for people who outlived their savings or became really sick or couldn't work anymore or whose family could no longer take care of them. It was really built around the war because all of the young men were going off to war and dying in World War II. And so that was a main provider was taken out of the households. We have lost our worker to retiree ratio because our population is collapsing. So in 1945, there was 42 people working per retiree. By 1960, it was down to 5 workers per retiree. In 2024, it was 2.7 workers per retiree, and the projection for 2035 is 2.3 workers per retiree. Okay. And like I said, without changing anything, there's going to have to be 23% benefit cuts in 2033. You want that? So I guess my point is that we all need to do something to figure out how to close the gap on that 23% because the government is not going to save us, okay? The benefit with the Trump accounts is that it is an opportunity to start with your children when they're young, put in $1,000 and add a little bit of money every year as if it's a long-term 401k, and then they have some money in the stock market and saved up so that when it comes time for them to retire, they have a little bit of cash. Okay? Or it could be used earlier than that if it needs to. But the reality of the situation is that with the average returns, it could be worth over $100,000 just off the initial investment at birth. Okay? Um, you add you add to that, and compound interest is a miracle. Okay, it's valuable to everybody. So if we can get on board with taking responsibility for ourselves, the savings rate obviously is not as high as it used to be. 3.5 to 4.5% is historically low. But again, it's not nothing. And we all need to remember that there is purpose in work, being productive, personal satisfaction. It's work is not just economic. It's deep and rooted in our souls, and it's what humans need to do. And without it, we don't have an income, we don't have an identity, we don't have structure, and we don't have purpose. And achieving goals through hard work is the primary driver of human happiness. Okay, it's not waiting around for the boomers to die so we can have all their stuff. Okay, you have to earn your own success. This is where like the mental health aspect comes in for me, because we see depression rates rising, we see anxiety through the roof, the kids don't want to work, they have all these disabilities, okay, mental health disabilities. And you know I think what's important to understand is that studies consistently show that unemployment is one of the strongest predictors of depression, more strongly correlated with reduced well being than almost any other life event. Okay. The labor force participation rate for men 25 to 54 has declined from 97% in 1960 to about 88% in 2024, meaning that 1 in 8 working able-bodied men are not working and not looking for work. Okay, that's the other thing, is that is included in the unemployment rate. So we have a population of prime working age men who are not working, who aren't looking for work. They're not retired. They're not in school. They're home doing nothing, not adding at all to the economy, except they're taking from it. And additionally, the data says they're miserable. It's not a success story. It's kids living off their parents, stuck in the house, taking pills. And this leads me into my next point, which this, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs peaks at self-actualization, which is this idea that you've realized your potential through purposeful activity, achievement, contribution, like family, like feeling proud of what you've created, okay? And dependency programs, while they help people get out of holes, for those that get stuck there, they do not have the opportunity to ever reach that self-actualization. Okay, they're never pushed, or they never experience what they need to get themselves out of problems, to build up, to work to this peak of I got somewhere, I did it. Okay, now here's the flip side of this. Okay, Mental health conditions, primarily depression and anxiety, now account for approximately 35% of all Social Security disability. Okay? In 2023, approximately 1.1 million new Social Security disability awards were made, where mental disorders were the #1 diagnostic category, depression and anxiety. Approximately 7.4 million Americans as of 2024 got disability at $150+ billion per year for depression and anxiety. So they have depression and anxiety. They can't work. They can't self-actualize. Not working is one of the leading causes of depression. And it creates this nasty cycle where not only are they on disability, they're probably on some level of Medicare or Medicaid, okay, to get whatever SSRI or whatever medication they're taking to deal with the mental health illness. When the reality is that could probably greatly be improved. Their disability could be greatly improved by doing a little work, by improving their own situation, by feeling productive, by having a positive outcome from their effort. Okay? The trend here is alarming. In 1980, there was only 10% of disability cases were awarded for mental disorders. By 2000, 25%. By 2010, 32%. And now here we are at 35%. Okay? We've gone from disability being about broken backs and real cancer, real issues, real physical problems. And I'm not saying that mental health is not a real problem. What I'm saying is that your broken spirit can be mended by doing something about it. Okay? And guess what? You know how many days a week I'm anxious and I still show up? All of them. All of them. You know how long I suffered with depression? Years. You know how many years I've worked? Since I was 13 years old. Okay? I applied for disability when I was 19 and severely mentally ill. And I was denied. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I did not get to sit there and just collect a check and do whatever the hell I wanted. I had to work for my life. And guess what? 2 businesses later and all of the success that I've had later, I am so grateful that I was not given that way out because I would have done nothing with my life and I would have never been as confident and proud as I am today because of where I know I started and where I see myself now. This is a huge problem for society. It is a huge problem for our fiscal budget. 35% of our disability is going for mental illness that could be improved by getting out there and doing it anyway. And here we are coddling and allowing it the easy street. Okay? Maybe I sound harsh, but I am only saying this from someone who has been in that position. I am only saying, I feel like I have the right to speak on it because of that. Okay? I have seen people who got disability, who got these entitlements, who didn't do anything with their life because of it. And I was denied that, and I had to pick up them bootstraps, baby. Get ready. Here we go. And I started from the bottom, and I built my skills, and I built my abilities, and you figure it out. But again, I see it the other day, this VA, the VA with the people who go to school for 2 years and then claim disability because of depression and anxiety. Never been to combat, never are reservists for crying out loud. Go to school on the military's dime, on a taxpayer dime, and then get out in 2 years of school they saw nothing on $2,000 a month disability because they were anxious and depressed? Excuse me? I don't have a lot of patience for it if you can't tell. There is a ton of studies and research showing that meaningful work is therapeutic because it provides structure, helps you develop an identity, it gives you the ability to learn authority and hierarchy. And at the end of the day, the sense of contribution makes you feel good about yourself. Okay. You can't replicate that by popping a pill. There's no SSRI that's going to build your self esteem. Like being able to show up for work, do hard work, and have somebody say, good job, or to build something and see you started with parts, you ended with a product. Naturally, in our brains, that gives us good chemicals that make us feel proud of ourselves, that make us feel happy. I mean, for those of you who are very academic, some of this research is coming from Harvard, okay? Their social science department and others show that unemployment itself causes depression. It's not just losing the income, but it's the identity that you don't have purposeful work that causes the main issue. The social disconnection, the lack of productivity. It's all very important. And so, my recommendation here on, a policy change is listen, if somebody's applying for disability based on depression and anxiety, we should be putting them into Job Corps or vocational training of some kind to help, and that might have some level of like group therapy aspect where you can kind of build yourself up altogether, because the reality of the situation is handing them a paycheck changes nothing. It causes the problem. It's not the loss of income that makes people depressed. It's the loss of productivity. You need to be able to earn your success in order to be proud of it. Um, it is, I don't want to seem harsh or unkind or insensitive. But again, I've been there. I've been there in a real way. And it would have been a worse handicap to be handed disability checks. Okay. Even if 10% of the current disability recipients for mental health conditions re-entered the workforce through, like I said, vocational rehab or even a part-time employment situation where people know, like, listen, this person has some level of mental health issue or whatever it would, whatever, we would save tens of billions of dollars a year. The American Disability Act, it already has workplace accommodation requirements. And they've improved. And it has allowed people with these issues to work within conditions that are appropriate and helpful for their needs. Okay. And like I said, maybe there's some national service or Job Corps, Peace Corps type of situation where these people can put their skills and talents to use and feel proud of themselves, and we don't have to pay all this money out for disability. Okay. Um, you know, my my closing thoughts on this are that fiscal responsibility is not about being heartless. It's about being honest. Okay. Every dollar every dollar that we spend irresponsibly is a dollar that is taken from someone else who earned it, or borrowed from our future generations. Okay. And the most compassionate thing that we can do is build a system that's actually sustainable, that actually helps people stand on their own 2 feet, and that doesn't promise more than it can deliver, because the debt is real, the fraud is real, and the crisis in purpose and work is real, and the people will suffer the most when the bill finally comes due. And it won't be the ones in Washington. It'll be the ones they claim to be helping. That's fiscal responsibility. And it's not controversial. It's math. Thanks for hanging in there with me today, guys. Again, I know this is not the most fun topic, but we need to start looking for politicians who are actually showing up with solutions on this because this doesn't get better and we're within 10 years of the buck stopping. That's two presidential cycles and it's a shit show. So when you look for who you're going to vote in midterms and when you look for who you're going to vote for in 2028, maybe we should put policy around fiscal responsibility right up there at the top, because if we start blowing out some more entitlements, we're in big trouble. Until next time.